Okay, so this is the wall system for the A-frame, and we basically designed the A-frame to deal with strength in being able to carry the loads that are attached to the L-track, which goes on top of these the A-frame, and also for speed and ease of install. So hopefully this will be much easier of an install than the 1.0 version. And there's some features where the vertical track, also known as the bed install kit, goes from floor to ceiling, which gives you more options for the height of the bed. Mostly options for down low. As you go high, then there's future compatibility for accessories that we have coming down the road. If you're getting just the install for the bed kit, you will get 1 through 4. So you can kind of think of this as two separate parts of the wall system. So 1 through 4 are the vertical track bracers, and 5 through 10 are the horizontal track. And they index together with the notches that we've built, as well as a couple of holes that are used just to line up off of OEM holes in the van. So this is the entire, if it's orange, it's part of the A-frame. Basically everything in the kit, if it's orange, it's part of the A-frame, it's part of what we've spent a lot of time engineering. And the install hardware, you'll have a bag of rib nuts, a bag of stainless steel screws, and these are black because if you got an anodized black kit, you'll get the black screws, and if you got the regular aluminum kit, you'll have the silver screws. So do check that. If you ordered an anodized kit and you have silver screws here, you'll know that you want to have these, and we'll get them to you overnight, but they should all match up. So along with that, you have some 3/16 rivets and a little tool to help index off of the OEM holes. I also like to use a couple of neodymium magnets. If you have welder magnets, whatever magnets you want to use, as long as they have quite a bit of force, you can use those, and they kind of help on the corners to make sure that one side is being held, and you can install it alone, and you don't need an extra hand out there. You can also use a set screw, and we'll go over all of that in the install video. But this is essentially what you get with the kit, and I think we're going to have an option to purchase some of the magnets as well if you're going to be doing it by yourself. All right, so that's pretty much the A-frame for the walls, and we'll go put it in. Okay, so we'll start with S1, and it goes right behind where the crew window is, or if you have a cargo van, this first bay. This index point right behind that window is what I call the zero line, because I zero out from behind the van and in front of the van from this line. The entire A-frame wall system will branch off of this like a tree, the horizontals do. So all of the horizontal pieces will butt tight to this piece. So be conscious of how you install this first piece, as well as the one mirroring it on the other side. First thing you'll notice is up here where the top tree branches out, you'll notice 2 holes that are very close together. The bottom hole is the index hole, and it will fit into this OEM hole in the aft side of the zero line. You will have to drill this out a little bit with that 25/64 bit, and of course do the deburring and rust preventative. So we'll start with that. So you can use the fat side of the index key, slip it through, and kind of wedge it in there. That'll line it up. I only use it really for the first rim nut that I put in, and I start at the top. And the reason why I do that, if I set the one on the bottom, the tailings from the sheet metal will get trapped behind here, and we don't want that. We don't want any tailings trapped behind here. They cause rust. So I use it to line it up on the bottom. double check that my indexes are hitting on the 0 line right there. You can see the crease right behind our indexes. And since I see that they're right where they should be, I punch that hole. Now, remove the index on the bottom, and that allows the tailings to float out from underneath. I can take my deburr, get that back edge, and because you're punching through the steel of the A-frame as well, make sure that you put rust preventative on both of them. And I just kind of goo it in there. And you're ready to set your next rib nut. And depending on your rib nut tool, this can take some time or be relatively quick. So once it's in, I can double check that I'm lined up. Now, it did tweak it a little bit on the bottom, so I'm gonna put my index back in right here for the next hole down. You don't have to worry about minor deflection. It'll kind of just straighten out as you move down. We'll go on to the second hole, or third hole here. Again, giving room for it to the tailings to come out from in between. And the rust preventative. Once you've got a couple of them in there, it just generally lines up really well. And you can just kind of move through, just paying attention, making sure you're hitting your marks of the index to the 0 line. I wait on the top and I do those last. I work myself down first, and then we can talk about the top. So again, I'll just continue this process all the way down. It's the same process over and over, and then we'll move to the back. So if you want to make this go a little quicker, once you've got the first 2 of them set up here, and your index is in on the bottom, you're pretty safe to just drill all the rest of the holes out in one pass, then deburr in one pass, and then go ahead and do the rust preventative on it. And it makes time go faster, so you're not switching tools every single hole. Bullet, allow the shavings to drop away. And you can be pretty liberal with this stuff. there it is. So once this is installed, which it's done now, we'll move to the number 2 piece. It says S2 on it, and it goes on the driver's side aft part of the vehicle.
Rolling.
Okay, so we just find the part that says S2, move to the back of the vehicle, it's on the driver's side, and there's a wire clip right here. You can just pull that clip out. This will allow the bracer to pass behind it. Now you'll notice there's a little tab out here. This is a manual bend at the factory, so they're not always perfect. And you can just take a mallet, bend it out of the way if it's hitting the side of the vehicle first. And if it does, and you make a little scratch in the paint, please be sure to use the rust preventative to cover that scratch. All right, so the top of these 2 holes, so it's the one basically right down to the left side of the number, this is your index hole. And it will go off of the OEM hole that is behind the last long-shaped cutout that holds the headliner in. So we're gonna do the same thing we did in the front, widen the hole, line it up with this index hole, and set that rib nut. All right, once that's set, down at the bottom, all right, so the second place to index is this little dimpled hole where this arm branches out to meet up with, and you can use the small side of the index tool. Depending on the powder coating, you may have to shave that tool down a little bit, but it's designed to fit in there. And then again, I move up to one of the closer holes so that I can allow some movement for the tailings to fall out from behind the metal. So I'll start with this hole right here. And do the same process of deburring and anti-rust. Because my index is still in the same place on the bottom, I can move into the next one. And then I'll work my way down. You'll notice there's also some small holes, and that's where I use the 3/16 rivets. At this point it's probably overkill, but for now we're going to keep it in there and let it be overkill. So once I set this one, I'm pretty certain that it's not going to float, so I'll go ahead and punch the rest of the holes. Let the tailings fall out. And go ahead and set them. So in setting these, if there's any gap behind the skin of the vehicle and the A-frame, just make sure you push nice and tight, close that gap before you set the riv nut. Otherwise the riv nut will just grab the A-frame sheet metal and not bite into the vehicle. All right, once you got your riv nut set, you can go ahead and change over to your 3/16 bit and go ahead and punch out the smaller holes. We do have one more riv nut up on top. This riv nut hole, leave open. It'll dovetail with the wire chase that we'll put in down the road here. This one, you definitely want to make sure that you're pushing to close the gap against the skin of the vehicle back here. Now here's a trick too. So with this hole, you definitely want to make sure, I mean, as with all of them, that the skin of the vehicle is pressed up against the A-frame. If it's not, a little bit of a trick is you can use a drill bit or a punch to kind of go around the hole and it'll pull the skin of the vehicle back up. This one bent back a little bit when we punched through, so I just wanted to bring it back forward. So I stick the smooth end of the bit into there and kind of rotate it around, and it'll pull it back up to the A-frame. And you can feel in the back, make sure you're connected, which we are. All right.
Okay, rolling.
All right, so we'll just start from the top and work our way down. We'll punch these and then do the rust preventative on it and set the rivets. And because nothing will move, we can go ahead and punch all of them at once. And don't forget you have the 2 holes on the bottom as well. I'm just letting the teeth of the brushes of the brush here pass through, so I'm kind of jamming it a little bit hard. But it's just making sure that that rust preventative oozes all the way through the hole and is thorough. Okay, ready? All right, so after you've put the 2 verticals in on the driver's side, the number 3 piece is going to go on the forward side right behind the 0 line, just like the number 1 piece did on the passenger side. It's the exact same process, the same index holes, so we won't have to go through all of that in the detail. Just know that you're going to do exactly the same thing, and we'll get those installed and we'll move on to the horizontals. All right. So once you have all of these rivets in, we have 2 left. They're the tabs that are sticking out on the inside of the window frames. So go ahead and punch those, and in all honesty, you can punch these holes out when you punch out the other ones. Alright, so once you've got all the rivets in, then we can move to the other side of the van, and it's the exact same process, same mounting holes, it's just the opposite because it's on the other side of the van. So we won't go into all the detail, but we'll go ahead and mount the other side of the van and we'll move on to putting the horizontals in. Okay, the only thing that's different on this side is that you have this bump out right here. So instead of lining up off of the little indexes on the Z line over there, you just go ahead and bump it up to the front of the front of this bump out, and we'll go ahead and set that top rib nut. And again, same sort of situation. We'll work our way down so that the tailings can fall out, move to the aft, and get them all in. Okay, so now we're ready to move on to the horizontals. And the first to go up is, again, it's labeled S5. When you put it up against the vehicle, make sure that the 5 and the S is reading properly. You could easily be flipping it, in which case you know you're installing it upside down and wrong. So it's pretty simple. Over here, this index will just slide over each other and it will hold it in place. This is where I like to use the magnets. So if you don't have the magnets, you can use a clamp, or you can also use a set screw right here. But what I like to do is just snap it right over the top of them, and it'll hold it together. However, when you're drilling your first hole here, you do want to keep pressure pushing towards this 0 line vertical, because it can still wander away like that, even with the magnet on it. So just be aware of that. It's a pretty easy thing to keep in mind. With the set screw, if you're going to use a set screw here, be sure that you set the set screw to the inside edge of this circle, which will keep it pinned against this vertical rail. So we're also going to put a magnet on the end here, and on this end you'll notice there is another OEM hole, and there is a slot, and you just kind of want to line that up. You can put the magnet right under it, and use that. You can also put a drill bit into it, and that will also hold it vertically in place where it needs to be on the vertical plane. So with Nathan holding that side up, we'll go ahead and set this first rib nut here. Same process, so we don't need to go over it every time, but drill it, deburr it, and treat it with the rust treatment. Double check to make sure you're nice and snug right here before you set this first rib nut. Once it's in, you can remove this magnet and it'll reveal your other hole here. I'm just gonna go ahead, we'll double check our alignment down here and set another one. And once two of them are set, I can go ahead and run the rest of them out, pull it away, get all the tailings out from behind it. All right, so we'll go ahead and punch the rest of the holes. Get a little chain going and I'll punch and you can do the deburring. And as I'm punching each hole, I'm still reflecting over and making sure my slot is lined up with the OEM hole. Just make sure I'm not drifting. Don't forget the hole that was covered with your magnet. Okay, so after we put in the S5, we're going to grab S6, not to be confused with S9. And the easiest way is the S is in front of the number. Also, S6 has a flat end on one side and an index on the other side. So it is on the lower side of the window, and the index is right here. We just put it over each other. And will you grab a magnet for me right there? We'll use the magnet. And this system here is going to be similar to what we did with the 1.0 in that you're checking the feeling of this little groove right here. This indentation goes all the way around the length of the van, and so you're going to match the way it feels down here with how it feels over there. So with the first screw, I just want to kind of get close there and I can feel it. And I'll put the first screw in, and then we just work our way down and we just feel, make sure that we're consistent all the way across. Again, putting a little bit of pressure in towards the first vertical wall A-frame part, and drill it out. Double check to make sure you didn't drift, which we did not. And then we'll go ahead and do the same thing that we did throughout the whole system.
It's all the way down at the end of the mat.
So right here, I punch the hole, and if this happens to you, which it may, one of the burrs sort of peeled up from the sheet metal on the vehicle and didn't actually detach. So I'm just using a flathead screwdriver to push it towards the center, and actually that just broke off. But if it did not break off and it just bent into the center again, you can take your drill bit and ream it out afterwards. That'll allow it to get out of the way. All right, so we set our first two rim nuts, and as I moved my finger forward, I could tell we're drifting down. And that's not too big of a deal. We just want to be able to pull it up. So I'm actually going to pull up where it needs to be and use a set screw to hold it in place. Okay, so I just set it on the top of that hole. It'll keep it from dropping too far down. Double checking. Yep, we're aligned. So we'll go ahead and punch our holes. Once the holes are punched, we can take the set screw out, but I'm going to wait to punch that hole until the other rib nuts are in, so it's framed up right where it needs to be. All right, so we finished putting the horizontals up on the forward side of the vehicle. Now we're going to move to the aft, and we're going to get the 7 and 8 pieces that go on the aft side. Again, we're going to drive everything towards the center line here. So we'll show you how that works. Okay, so we've got the S7 piece, goes on the top. You'll notice the index is round here as opposed to square. And that is just simply so that people can't swap the parts and put them in the wrong places. So S7 goes up on top, and the back has a little index as well. Now, I'm going to put my magnet here, and the back, you'll notice, actually has a gap. And it's supposed to have a gap. The gap should be right around 1/8 of an inch. But because every vehicle is a little bit different, I needed to give clearance for it to shrink and grow by about 1/8 of an inch. That seems to be give enough clearance for any kind of variation of where these things actually end up sitting. So if there's a gap between the vertical aft piece and the end of S7, that's okay. The important part is there is no gap on the vertical plane. So it dovetails in and it holds it exactly where it needs to be on the vertical plane. But again, as long as we're pushing everything forward to this center line, it should line out well. If the gap is totally close, you'll end up having to trim off the edge of your track that goes over the top of it. So which is a pretty simple solution with just a carbide blade on a chop saw or a hacksaw or whatever you have around. But it's meant to be very close, and there will be a very minimal gap if it's a little bit too long, so it'll all fit well. Again, it's the very same process, so we don't need to get too detailed about it. We're just going to set our holes, clean them, rust prevent them, and mount our rib nuts. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next part, marked S8, which is on the bottom of the rear window area. And this time you do not have to worry about where it lines up on that little bump out, because the rear vertical bracer has the index to hold it into place. So we can just go ahead and punch our holes. On the top one, I punched each of the holes before I even set the front one, and because I was very mindful of keeping all the pressure forward. However, on the very last hole, do not punch that one. There is an OEM hole there, and if you start to punch it, it'll pull it off and misset it. So you never want to set that very last hole if you haven't set at least one rib nut in the track or in the A-frame before. So I'm going to do the same process here. Punch all the holes, pull this down, clean it, and rib nut it up. So this is also a good time to patch any of the OEM set screw holes, or put the rust preventative in it. They just drill right through the sheet metal, and they're untreated, so just out of kind of best work practices, I go ahead and put some rust prevention on those as well. Okay. One final detail. It's important that you set at least one rib nut before you punch all the rest of the holes. But in this situation, you really only need to set one rib nut because the bracers hold the A-frame exactly where it needs to be. So at least set one so it doesn't slide back and forth, and then you can punch all the rest of your holes and sort of pull the A-frame away from the skin of the van, clean it, and do the rust treatment. So we're going to do the same thing now to the passenger side of the vehicle. It's the exact same process that we did for the back two. Obviously, because of the sliding door, we don't have the forward A-frame horizontals that need to go in. So we'll just go ahead and put those in, and we'll move on to the next stage. Okay, so S9 goes on the top of the window. This isn't a handy time for the magnets. If there is a little bit of a difference in the plane, if this is coming away from the skin of the van a little bit, don't worry about it. But the important thing is that this index is not sliding down behind it like that. So this is where these magnets come in very handy, because they'll pull everything right up to the same plane and keep it locked into place. So again, drive it all forward so that this index is nice and tight, and we'll set our first hole. Okay, and like I mentioned earlier, once you have the first one set, you're welcome to go ahead and punch all of the other holes and get a little bit more quicker install out of that. So we finished the top, moving on to the bottom. Do we have a magnet here? All right, so we completed the A-frame for the walls, including the vertical wall bracers. Again, if you're going to just buy the bed, you're only going to be putting in the 4 vertical wall bracers and none of the horizontals. So from this point, we're going to move into the electrical. And the reason why we do the electrical after the wall A-frame set is because we don't want to punch a hole through the skin of the vehicle into our wiring harness that we're going to drop down some of these cavities. So it's best practices is to do the wall A-frame before the electrical and hold off on the ceiling until after the hush mat.